Hello, everybody. This is Tony Beadle. I'm president and CEO of Rockport Music, and it's my pleasure today to have a conversation with the founders of Rockport Music. They are David Alpher, Paul Sylva, and representing Lila Deis is her husband, Karl Lauby, who was also there at those very important moments when the whole idea of having a chamber music festival in Rockport was hatched.
If I may opine, David will and Paul will chime in. That was fundamental to David and Lila's thinking about the festival because they wanted musicians to come in two groups with a prepared program from each group for one night, one concert, Thursday and Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday would be collaborative concerts that the musicians often had never played themselves before. And the rationale for that was it would be exciting for the musicians to be able to do new repertoire for them or something they were not familiar with in their own performing group. And also it would be an opportunity to have interaction of rehearsals all week long in the Art Association and the church and other rehearsal spaces, but I think those were the two main ones for the musicians, which would be open to the public. And so the visitors to the Art Association could wander in and hear wonderful chamber music off and on all week long. It was quite magical.
It really was, Carl.
And this leads me back to some of the earlier comments about Rockport itself. I understood that this visual artistic heritage could play in once we started to flesh out some ideas like the double residencies that Carl was just talking about. This music would have to be rehearsed because these groups, they probably didn't know each other, they didn't know the repertoire. But what happened was when they were rehearsing all week in the same space, mainly in the Art Association, there were other locations too, but mainly there, visual artists would come in and paint, but not that they were told to. They on their own initiative, they would sketch and paint and draw these musicians sitting on the stage and putting together the learning of this great music and the putting it together and playing it and stopping and playing it. You know, it became a multi-artistic thing. It became. I'm always someone who's more interested in process than product. To me, the glory of those years was not the concerts, but with that rehearsal week. It was the preparation. It was the involvement with the town, people coming and going, musicians staying in houses and inns. There was a complete musical and social interaction for an entire 7-day period, which of course would be absolutely impossible financially unless people stepped up and welcomed musicians into their homes and inns and private house, whatever. So that was an invaluable contribution, something that I insisted on, and I think correctly, that each group establish an identity, one on Thursday, one on Friday, so that people who came to as patrons, as audience members, once you see the collaborative concerts on Saturday and Sunday, they know these people, and they know them from participating in their own ensemble, on their own sound. So it was much more exciting than just having a group on Thursday, a group on Friday, another group comes in on Thursday, and Saturday another group comes in on Sunday. By the time that Sunday rolled around, there had been a total civic, musical, and social involvement. That to me was innovative. It was exciting. It was groundbreaking, and I loved it. I mean, it was exciting.
It was wonderful. It was a magical, musical, creative moment.
These two groups are coming in, and yet we have to find repertoire that they're interested in and want to do with combining players or some player from each group, and then sort of a hybrid group on the spot, which was fast. I mean, it's obviously had great results because they were great musicians to begin with. It must have been quite laborious, actually.
It was a real negotiation. The Thursday and Friday concerts, of course, the individual groups could pretty much program what they wanted as long as it fell within the time parameter, and as long as we hadn't programmed the same piece, a year or two ago. But the Saturday and Sunday concerts, That was very, very laborious because we often, with the one, Lila and I were the ones to decide what works would be very exciting to do and which are almost never done. It comes to mind the Saint-Saëns septet, sextet for string quartet, double bass, and trumpet,
Right.
and piano.
Mhm.
String quartets, double bass. You know that piece, Tony.
I
You're a
do.
bass player. Yes. And I'm going to tell you a story about that in a while. But there is something that, because of our format, we were able to program.
I
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
Lila's date books from the 80s are filled with entries where she visits the Lincoln Center Chamber Music Library doing research.
Oh,
She
yeah, I was there
spent 2 and
constantly.
3 hours, and I'm sure you probably did too. I don't know how you did your research, but Lila went to the Lincoln Center Chamber Music
That's
Library.
how I did it. That's
Yeah.
how I did it. And then when I was living in Rockport, I did that at MIT. You say we had 2 string quartets in residence, which rarely happens. But if it happened, one of the obvious things to do and collaborate was the Mendelssohn octet. If you're dealing with the Mendelssohn octet, the first violin of the 4, who has to be the first violin of one of the 2 groups, he or she has the plum role in that piece. There's no question about it. And string quartets, the first violin is always the diva of the quartet. It's always the one with the big ego. Somebody's got to yield to play that great piece.
Let's switch it off at movements. That would be possible, you know. You could do like variation on that.
I think that kind of thing would have flown later on, decades later, when string quartet started to.
But we never did that.
No. We dealt with egos which were not hidden.
So you talked earlier about researching music and everything, and that was one thing that struck me going through the early concerts and looking at the programs. Is this musical curiosity that jumps out at you by virtue of the composers that you have standard literature, what we call that, but you had a lot of new works as well, and so you really were doing your homework in terms of what would make good programming, and bring something new and to the audience as well as the chestnuts. And the other thing I'd like to talk about for a few minutes is Lila herself, because there's an artist whose pan musical interests is reflected in what she was singing. I mean, every concert program, I pull the thing out and I read it. I was like, 1 minute it's Berlioz, the next minute it's George Gershwin, the next minute it's, Brahms. It's all over the musical map, and that was fantastic.
I will, as the husband, I will defer to Mr. Alpher to speak about that, because he and Lila concertized for decades.
Yeah.
They were thrown together and in an academic setting at Indiana University when they did not even know each other. Correct me if I'm wrong, David. They were
Correct.
designated by the professor in charge to, you play the piano? Accompany the soprano and prepare this piece for the class and for the next session. And that was the beginning of their collaboration, which went on from the 1960s through the end of Lila's life.
So David, you must have discussed repertoire with Lila, but she was ready, and she handled all the musical styles, and Gershwin to Brahms, it's just I kind of how singers are touchy about what their favorite repertoire is and everything, but Lila was rather fearless in that regard.
She was totally fearless. She had an incredible range of musical interests, and an ability to sing in different styles, from early music through to the Romantic era, through the Great American Songbook,
and lots of languages.
And plenty of languages. I mean, she played to her strength. All singers have to do that, but her strengths were many. And I tried desperately when I gave my talk in Rockport in 2011, the year after Lila died. I tried to give the audience some idea who Lila was, what her contributions were, and how it would have been impossible without her. I mean, in addition to her artistry, which I think was very much underappreciated in her lifetime, her personality was such, and her drive and her energy was such that it became almost self-perpetuating. You with energy like that, it couldn't possibly fail. And she would do every little task, licking envelopes and putting up posters and you know, glad handing people and giving parties and making food. I mean, these are things that are beyond my comprehension. That's not me, but it was Lila.
You're great collaborators. You were great collaborators all over.
Yeah.
And you know, it's astonishing. I mean, someone, I think Karl, I was reading what Noel had to say in response to your treasure trove there, and he said Lila was a force of nature. She was a force of nature.
I noted that she would come out and open the concert talking to everybody, but then she'd be performing later on. Artists don't usually shy away from that, but what that told me was she's got skin in this game, man. You know.
Oh yeah, Lila could get out and speak, like Tony was saying, get up and speak for the audience, and then come back and give a performance, because she genuinely liked people. She liked to interact with people, and she never held herself on some artistic pedestal, or you say, "Oh, I have my process. I have to have 2 hours of massage before I can think about the piece." That was, in a way, because she was so gregarious and so laugh oriented and people oriented. I think that was one reason that people did not appreciate her artistry as much as they should have. Because she just seemed so folksy and just so one of us, and so all shucks, you know.
Yes, that comes through in the recordings for sure. But now you, as a composer, there's several of your pieces sprinkled out through in the festival. And by the way, I'm your probably latest and great fan, becoming late to the game because I've been listening to them on the recordings, and we talked about that a little bit. But I mean, were they written, some of the pieces? I don't know if they were premieres or what, but was a Rockport music concert ever an impetus for you to want to sit down and write something, or thinking about this player or that player or things like that?
Totally. Most things that of mine that were performed there were world premieres. Some of them were their first and last performances, and so that was really historic. But yes, no, it was very exciting for me as a composer. Very, very, and
David was instrumental in arranging several other of his collegial composers around the country to compose pieces, to have their pieces performed at Rockport. And David, a couple of years, organized and chaired some lovely composer seminars.
It was very, very good. I had George Crumb, among others, on the panel. And I remember so distinctly, we had a question and answer period, and someone from the audience who says she came from the Philadelphia area where Crumb lives, said, "Now, I have a question. I have attended Philadelphia orchestra concerts and other concerts in the Philadelphia area for years. I have heard your music a lot. I have never, ever liked any of it. Can you tell me why that could be?" And George Crumb answered in his West Virginia drawl, "Well, maybe you just have good taste." I remember that moment forever.
So Paul, what about Rockport? How do you think that the festival changed Rockport and has turned the tide in the town, at least maybe economically, but in those first formative years, it must have created a lot of excitement here.
It did, but it had a sort of a mixed reaction with the audience. For instance, we David and Lila would often subscribe to Shostakovich, try and put one of the quartets on for Shostakovich. And initially, many people would say, oh my God, I can't stand any Shostakovich. Don't ever program any of that anymore. That has reversed. Now people come to Rockport to hear the Shostakovich. It's just unbelievable, isn't it, David, the way this audience has adapted to it?
It is.
Adopted.
And yet it mirrors a larger truth. I mean, if you go back to the premiere of The Rite of Spring in Paris in 1913, it provoked a riot. It was deemed not to be music. And within a very short number of years, it became standard literature. And now people flock to hear any performance of The Rite of Spring. It can happen. As I always say, unoriginally, the cream rises to the top. If something is artistically valid, in a few years or a few decades, it will still be there.
That's right. What do you think of from the beginning? What is it that do you see anything that is your legacy here? I mean, I see lots of it in terms of what you started that we still do, maybe in a different fashion. But Shaolin Performance Center was designed to try to capture what you innately knew about Rockport Art Association, what you had to do by putting things on the side, which was to keep the intimacy of the event paramount.
Well, that's a big question. I think the hall is beautiful. I've played there twice now, and it's gorgeous, and it does feel intimate, and it has that incredible backdrop which integrates it. I don't think about my legacy. I like to think that I'm just getting started.
I don't mean you personally. I mean things that you did. For example, the relationships with the artists when they come into town, and we still do that. We have our own version of it, as Paul pointed out. Although with Barry Schiffman, groups are coming for longer periods of time and staying together and combining. So it's kind of revisiting that way of working that you guys had. And I think too that desire to explore music and Lila's exploration of repertoire and composers and who's out there. Just you have your composers lecture. That's like an initial curiosity about music that we're just not going to play Beethoven and the usual stuff, but you're educating the audience and opening their auditory vista a little bit. I mean, I think the people at Rockport Music today owe you that, and Lila and you, Paul, that debt for doing it the right way from the get-go.
Well, thank you.
You did it.
Thank you. Yeah. It was always my feeling, and Lila's too, that we were not interested in being curators.
Right.
This was a living art. That was the compositions were still being composed as we spoke. The repertoire continues to be expanded. Yes, there's a lot of junk out there, but there was always a lot of junk. This is what people don't realize. When they hear a concert of Beethoven and Brahms and Tchaikovsky, they're hearing music that has been vetted, as it were, over hundreds of years. In the time of Beethoven, Brahms, and Tchaikovsky, there were all kinds of third-rate and fifth-rate and tenth-rate music being written that has not withstood the test of time. So when you program contemporary music, you're taking a risk. The bottom line is to keep this exciting. Even though, I mean, the Beethoven, Razumovsky quartets, or the Brahms sextets are fabulous pieces that will never die. If you give the audience only that, we become museum curators.
Right.
And we're dealing with a living art. And that's what and Lila totally agreed, that we keep that idea, that spirit going. Yeah.
And the living art and the living place is instrumental. It seemed to be beautiful, vibrant chamber music in a gorgeous setting like Rockport is, where people can connect to it and enjoy it and have a good time with each other and the musicians. That's wonderful. And that's what the Chamber Music Festival was.
Yes.
In those early years. And that's what I hope it continues to be for a long time.
it was to me an effort to bring chamber music to its semantic and actual roots. Chamber music, an intimacy with not only with an audience, but with a circle, with a milieu. You know, this music was created so that people could hear it up close and not from a huge auditorium or a church. It was in a living room, in a large space like that. And inevitably they would get to know the musicians. So you had to, you were that close.
Right.
These were not remote people on the stage and you were 85 rows back in the second balcony. These are people who were in your life in some way. And if they could be in your life for a week rather than a day, all the better.